Hello friends, this is Kaan here, and in this tutorial I'm going to show you how to create a very simple, very easy to create shooting mechanic using a Raycast 2D node. So there's a bunch of cool stuff to cover in this one. Let's get started with the explanation. So first of all, as usual, I'm going to explain how this works in theory using my painting app here, and then we're going to switch over to Godot and implement this. A good challenge for you is going to be watch the explanation or listen to the explanation that I'm going to give now, and then go into Godot and try to implement this yourself, because that way you can actually improve your skills instead of just watching me do it and then follow along blindly. And that's the real game development skill that I want you to achieve here, not just following tutorials. So listen to it. If you haven't seen the previous tutorials, also take a look at those as well. I'll have them in the description probably. And then, like I said, give it a go. If you can't do it, it's all fine. You can just come back and watch it. But yeah, that's going to be important. So with that being said, today we're going to implement shooting the enemy. And let me explain how that's going to work. So in shooter games, usually there's two different ways of implementing a gun. The first way is using a projectile, which is going to be a game object that we spawn. It's an actual object in the game. We're going to spawn it at the tip of the gun usually, and then we're going to launch it. So it's an actual object with a collision shape, a sprite, a script probably, and that's going in a certain direction. And once it hits the enemy, it's going to hurt the enemy. And usually, since these are actual objects traveling through the game, you can dodge them. So if the projectile isn't very fast, the enemy might be able to dodge it, or the player might be able to dodge it as well. So it has its advantages, it has its downsides. It really depends on what you want to do. So that's the first type. Usually in games, if you have like a rocket launcher, it usually has a projectile, for example. And then the second type is going to be a raycast. And a raycast is a very simple concept. It's a technique that you can use. And in Godot, there's a node called Raycast 2D. If you want to do a 2D raycast, there's also a 3D version as well. And the way we use this is we give it a starting point, which is going to be the tip of the gun. And then we give it a length. So let's say it's this, the length is this. Once you activate the raycast, it's going to check if anything is colliding with it. So in this case, this enemy, for example. And if we had stuff behind the enemy, for example, if we had a box here and maybe another enemy here, and if the raycast was, long enough, it could, collide with all of these. But we only want the first one. And to get that, there's a function called getCollider that we can use, which is going to give us the first object the raycast collided with. So that's basically how a raycast works. And this, like the difference between this and the projectile, is that the raycast is instant. The second, the millisecond, probably the nanosecond you activate the raycast, it's going to hit the enemy, just like that. So like the enemy is not going to be able to dodge it. No one is going to be able to dodge this if the gun aligns with the enemy. So it's going to give a more like responsive instant hit. Probably closer to like a real life gun, because in real life, even though in real life it's a real projectile moving through space, it's so fast, it's instant, right? You can't see the bullet, in real world when someone fires a gun. The raycast gives a similar feeling. You shoot something, they get hit instantly. And there's, in the case of the game, there's no projectile, there's no, collision shape, traveling through space, nothing, instant hit. And it's just going to give a different feel. Games like Counter-Strike, for example, use raycasts. So when you shoot someone in Counter-Strike, it's an instant hit. And even though they have like a visual effect that plays as well, so sometimes you can actually see bullets flying through, like while playing Counter-Strike, but those are completely visual. Those bullets don't actually do anything. They simply do a raycast, and at the same time, they play like an animation of a bullet. But it's the raycast that does, the detection or the damage. So that's the shooting part. We're going to do a little bit more. mainly, let's see, we're going to make the enemy follow the player once it's shot, even if the player is outside of the range of the enemy. Important thing, because the enemy isn't that dumb, right? If they get shot, they're gonna know. And we're also going to play sound effects. I actually took some notes here. Let's take a look. Because I'm doing this off the cuff, I don't want to get lost. So raycast and the shoot sound, I'm actually do that last. Let's see. Raycast, shooting logic. The enemy is going to take damage, so we're going to create like hit points for the enemy and all that stuff. And then the enemy is going to follow the player after getting shot. And then we're going to create some sound effects. And the sound effects are going to be a game changer. Like when we implement the shooting, it's going to look cool. But until we add in the sound effects, it's going to feel kind of like dead. It's not going to feel very juicy. The game feel isn't going to be there. But once we add some sound effects, oh man, it's going to be much different. So make sure to stick around until the end to see the difference. And like, it's going to make a big difference. I actually forgot to add something here. I also want to shoot the player, take the damage, and also enemy shot animation. So we're going to play a little animation as well when the enemy is shot. Okay, so that's all I want to achieve. So let's switch over to Godot and start implementing this. Okay, first of all, let me take a look at my notes here. So first of all, obviously, we're going to create the raycast in the player. So let's go into the player. Let's create a new node. This is going to be a Raycast 2D. We can rename this to be something like shoot Raycast or something. And then we're going to place this at the tip of the gun. So just at the tip. And as you can see, currently it's looking downwards. And if you go into the inspector, you can see that that has to do with the target position. Currently, the target position is 0 on the X and 50 on the Y. So we need to set the Y to be 0 and then X to be something positive, like 100. If you set it to be negative, it will look left. So we want it to be positive. And the length of this is going to determine how far the player can shoot. And I'm just going to make it something kind of arbitrary, like 1,000. Like that maybe. Yeah, that seems good enough. Yeah, I don't want to shoot things that are very far off into the distance, like, because this is going to be like an open world game. I don't want to shoot things very far away. So I'm just going to keep it at 1,000, but this is something we would test and iterate over and over again as we make the game. You can see that there's a collision mask here. So we're going to look for the environment and also the enemy. We need to check for the environment as well, because if there's a box in front of us and there's an enemy behind the box, we want to be able to check for the box as well, because we don't want to shoot the enemy that's behind the box. So that's why we're also going to check for the environment. And collide with is also going to be kind of important. Yeah, let's say we also collide with areas, although it doesn't really matter. We'll just turn it on. Let's see. What else do we need here? It seems like that's all we need. So we have the raycast, it's this long. Now we're gonna go into the script and actually use it. And in terms of the input, I believe we created a shoot action, which is the left mouse button. Good. So let's go into the script. Let's do this in the process function. It seems to be a good place to do this. So first of all, we'll just check if input is action just pressed, shoot. We'll just print something to test that it's working. So when we press the mouse button, we print shoot. Okay, good. So first of all, let's actually create a reference for the raycast. Shoot raycast, shoot raycast. And like I said, the raycast is going to have get collider. And this, if you control click on it, you can read the description, returns the first object that the ray intersects, or null if no object is intersecting the ray. And we can also do is colliding, actually.
to check if something is colliding or not as well, first of all, before that. So what I'll do is I'll just say if shoot raycast is colliding. If we're colliding with something, when we press shoot, then we can get the collider. Let's say collider. And now we have the first thing that the raycast collided with. Next up, we're simply going to check what this is, because it might be a box, it might be the enemy, and it might be something else that we added into the game. Thankfully, there's a very easy way to check if this is an enemy or not. We can simply say if collider is enemy. And I can even do if collider is static body 2D. And then I'll just turn this to an else if. So if it's a static body 2D at this point in the game, it's basically guaranteed to be a box. So shot a box. And then if we shoot the enemy, we'll just say print shot the enemy. Good job. Okay, so let's test this out. Let's see, so if I shoot a box, shot a box, and if I'm shooting nothing, let's see, there's a box there as well. Okay, if I'm shooting nothing, not printing anything, if I shoot a box, it's printing shot a box, and if I shoot this guy, it says shot the enemy. As you can see, it's working. And if I try to shoot him like this, it says shot a box. Exactly what we want. Perfect. Next up, now that we can detect that we're shooting the enemy, we can actually implement the enemy's health and the enemy's take damage function. Okay, so actually here, let's say collider, let's actually create an enemy variable and say collider as enemy. This is a cast. So it's basically going to take the collider and it's going to turn it into an enemy, because that's what it is, so that we can get some auto completion with the functions inside of the enemy class, basically. So for example, what do we have here that we created ourselves? Nothing right now. So let's say take damage amount, that will be an integer. If you go back into the player script, now we can say e.take damage, and you can see there's like auto completion. Whereas if you just said collider.take damage, it shouldn't really work, but I guess it actually works, and that's because we have this here. So Godot is smart, so it's actually filling in the blanks for us. But if I just try to do it here, for example, it's not going to give me any auto completion, as you can see. It's actually giving me nothing, because at this point, since this is an interpreted language, it's not really clear what this is just yet. Like, it's whatever get collider returns, we don't know. But if you do this check here, if collider is enemy, in this if statement here, it's guaranteed that this is an enemy. So that's why we can actually just use the take damage and get the autocomplete. Small tangent, but I think it's cool. So we actually don't even need this. We can just say collider.take damage because of the if statement. But if you just wanted to do something here without doing an if statement, and you knew it was an enemy, then you can use as, I guess, enemy, just like that. And then you can get the autocomplete. Cool. So, yeah, we'll just say take damage, and we'll just damage by 1. You can turn this into a variable in the player. For example, like how much the player's gun hurts the player, that would be the variable. You can have different guns, for example, and so you can pass different values depending on which gun the player is using. You can have power-ups. Once you take them, the damage increases. You can do tons of stuff with this basic system. Like, you can take this and use it as like a framework and create something cooler. But for now, we'll just say 1. And in the enemy, we want the enemy to take damage. So we'll create a variable up here called hit points. This will be an integer. We'll set it to be 3 at the start. So it will take 3 hits to kill the enemy. And then, let's see. In take damage, we'll first check if the amount that we passed is greater than 0. Otherwise, it's pointless. If it is, we'll say hit points minus equals amount. So we deduct whatever damage from the enemy's hit points. And after that, we should also play like enemy hurt sound, play enemy hurt sound. And after that, we basically need to check if the hit points are 0 or less. In that case, the enemy is gone. So we'll say if hit points less than or equal to 0, print enemy died, and Q3. Maybe we can just print the name. Yeah, this should basically kill the enemy. Hit points 3. Okay, so let's see. In the player, yeah, everything should be working. Let's give it a shot. 1, let's see, are we printing? 2, 3. Yes, as you can see, I clicked 3 times. You probably didn't hear it because my mouse is very silent, but clicked 3 times and the enemy died, basically. Yeah, so that's what we want to achieve. So that is the raycast, and that's also the shooting logic and the take damage in the enemy. And then, we have the animation, which is going to start juicing this up, because as you can tell, currently it looks like kind of shit. So let's make this look a little bit nicer. So to create that effect, we're going to create an animation player in the enemy. And we're going to create an animation called take damage. We'll set this to be like 0.3 seconds. It has to be very quick. And let's get closer. And we're simply going to change the sprite's modulate to red so that it has a red tint to represent that it's being hurt. And then we're going to interpolate that back into the original color of the sprite. So let me actually turn off these collision shapes so that we can see it. And while I have the animation player selected and the animation open, I'm going to click on the sprite. And then I'm going to go into visibility. And we have this modulate here, which basically gives it a tint, as you can see. And we can pick any color that we want, but red is going to be for blood. So that will be red. And then what we can do is we can set it to be completely red, just like that. And then we can key that by clicking on this button and click on create. And then at the end of the animation, we'll set this back to be white. And key again. Make sure to key or else it's not going to work. And as you can see now, Godot has created the in-between frames to shift the color from red to white. And you can click on this button to see it in action. So very simple effect that you can create using the sprites modulate property, but it works and looks good. And there's also a reset here, which is red. So this should be white. So just pick the reset animation here, reset the modulate and click on key again. Godot just creates this to reset things, I guess. So yeah, by default, we'll just keep it at reset, but the next step is going to be using the take damage function, the animation from our script. Let's create a reference up here to the animation player, anim player. And then when we take damage, we'll play it. Anim player.play, take damage, just like that. Let's try. And as you can see, now it's looking much nicer and you can actually see that I'm shooting it. Feedback, that's important in games. Like once you do something, you shoot something, you pick something up, you pick a power up, always you need feedback to give to the player in terms of like visuals, animation, sound effects. That's what makes the game feel enjoyable. Okay, so that's great. Let's see, what's next? I like this note. I never do this, but it helps, keep the composure. So the animation enemy is going to follow, and then finally we have the sound effects, which is going to be awesome. So okay, that's going to be very simple. See if you can do this by yourself, by the way. It's just going to be a single line of code. So in the enemy we have the player, and once the player is found, this is going to kick in and follow the player. So if we want the enemy to follow the player, we simply set this variable to the player. That's it. And this, like, we could also just call this the target actually, and then we can have enemy follow anything. It can be more general than just the player. Okay, so in the player, we can do it here. We can do it in take damage, but doing it here is going to be easier. After we take damage, we can say, actually before, we can say collider.player equals self. Self is going to represent this object, which is going to be the player. So we're giving the enemy our self to follow, basically. Now we can shoot the enemy, and the enemy will follow us. And the downside of this is they will never stop following us with this, because we made them follow us outside of the collision shape. So I can get in the collision shape and get out again, and then they'll stop. But if I shoot them here and I maintain the distance, even if I go very far, they will still continue. So that's a bug that you can fix if you want. We can set like a timer here, you know, and then stop chasing if the timer goes out. Easy solution right there. Just thought of it at the top of my mind. So if you want to do that. It's a cool idea. But finally, what we're going to do is the sound effects. So there's going to be two. First one will be in the player, which will be an audio stream player. It can be a 2D one, doesn't really matter. We'll call this the shoot sound or shoot SFX. We'll just say sound. It's going to have, let's go into the sound effects, the gunshot. There's a gunshot and a short one. I think I want to use the normal one. And then, let's see, anything else do I want to change here? Not really. Yeah, that will be it. And then we'll also do the same in the enemy. And this will be the hurt sound, which will be zombie hurt. And those will be the only ones I implement in this lecture. So very straightforward. Let's first of all do this one by one. I'll create a reference here. Let's do the shoot sound first. So this will be in here. So after we shoot, we can just say shoot sound.play. Now this is going to be somewhat problematic because if I play the sound, it's going to come out of my speakers and it's going to go into my microphone. So it's going to sound horrible. So that's why I'm going to actually turn off the sound of my computer. Set it to be 0. And then I'll play the game. But I'm not going to be able to hear it. But will you be able to hear it? You should be able to hear it. Let's see. Boom. I can't hear it. I hope you can. Let me actually turn it up a little. You know what I'll do? I'll actually, just to make sure that you can hear this, I'll actually use my trusty earbuds. And then I'll switch my, what did I type something? No, okay. Sound source to them. Hey, just Kaan from the future here. At this point, since I switched to my earbuds, like I stopped recording the sound that's coming from the game, unfortunately. So after this point in the video, you're not going to be able to hear the sound effects, but let me just show you how it, ends up sounding like. And, you're just going to have to go through the video like that. So in the end, it's like this. Okay, as you can see, it's very cool. It's a night and day difference between without sound effects and with sound effects. So with that being said, let's get back into the video. Okay, cool. And then I'll play the game. And now everything should be just fine. And as you can see, just that sound effect makes things so much different. Like shooting actually feels fun now with the sound. Otherwise, it just feels like bland, emotionless. And let's see, I'm actually gonna put more enemies. Just Control D to duplicate and just like put a few of them into the area, just like that. And now when I shoot them, even if they're like far away, they're gonna start chasing me. And I just realized I'm only playing the sound when I'm shooting the enemy, so that's not gonna be good. And that's because, let's see. Should be playing all the time. Oh, it's only when it's colliding, so yeah, duh, okay. Yeah, now it plays all the time, perfect. Obviously, you can shoot very fast. You can introduce like a cooldown mechanic. That's something we can do later. If I do all of these things, it's just gonna make the tutorial like 2 hours long, so just gonna keep it a little bit shorter. So next up, let's do the hurt sound. Hurt sound. And then we'll just play this here. What am I doing? Hurt sound, dot play. Perfect. Now it feels much better. It feels like we're actually hurting, the enemy and making a difference in the game world instead of being boring. Okay, so that's it. Yeah, that's all the list. So in this one, what we did is to do a small recap for you guys. We created a Raycast 2D in the player. We set the collision to be the environment and the enemy layer, and then we made it 1,000 pixels long on the x-axis. So you can play with this to create different types of guns. Maybe you have like a sniper rifle that can shoot very far away, and maybe you have like a pistol that can only shoot very little distance, blah blah blah. You can think of that as well. So that's the Raycast, and after that we went into the script and we created this little if statement here, which is first of all checking if we pressed the left mouse button. If so, play the sound effect, and after that check if the Raycast is currently colliding with anything or not. If yes, we get the first object that we're colliding with. Let's see, is there an object? It's an object. Okay, get out of my way, Windows. Ruining my tutorial. Windows, come on, have some manners. Yeah, we get it as an object. And then we store it in this variable, and then we check if it's a static body 2D, that's going to be a box because that's the only static body 2D we have in the game. Else, if it's an enemy, then we can hurt it and then set ourselves as its player so that it starts chasing us. So that's what we did here. And then in the enemy, we created a variable to keep track of the health of the enemy, which we set to be 3 at the start. And then we created the take damage function, which is going to deduct the amount that was passed from the hit points, play the hurt sound, play the animation, and if the hit points reach 0 or less, we basically delete the enemy. And in the end, I just explained it, but yeah, we also created the animation. Let's also take a look at that real quick. So we created an animation player, and what we did was we created a very short animation which animates the modulate property of the sprite to be red, completely red at the start, and then at the end it's white again, which is going to turn it back into its original color. So that was the animation, and then finally we also created the sound effects so that we have some game feel, game feel, basically. Yeah, And obviously we also made the enemy follow the player when it's shot by setting this. So that's it. That's the tutorial. I hope that it was helpful. If it was, make sure to let me know. If there's anything you want to learn, make sure to leave a comment. If you have any feedback about the tutorial, make sure to leave a comment. If you like it, consider subscribing, because I will be creating these weekly. So there's going to be new ones coming out each week, potentially more than one each week, although it's not a promise. But with that being said, that will be the end. Bye.